Hostage, a Todd Mills mystery, book 3 in the series. Arthur R.D. Zimmerman, publisher, Scribble Pub. Narrator, Eric Ost. Chapter 14. Lyle Cunningham, the bodyguard hired to protect Johnny Clariton, made sure he was the first one questioned at the restaurant, and then again at the police station in the Minneapolis City Hall, where they were all taken, and his credentials ensured that he was the first one released. Now, leaving the huge granite building, a fortress-like edifice, he stepped outside and hailed the first taxi. Big and brawny from years of training, Lyle had been brought in by Clariton's publisher to provide security here in Minneapolis. It was an assignment Lyle had been most reluctant to accept, for he was anything but a supporter of Clariton and his politics. In fact, if anyone on Clariton's staff had inquired what Lyle thought of the congressman, Lyle would have openly and honestly replied that he was at the other end of the spectrum. No one however, had made an attempt to screen him for his personal views, and so the job was Lyle's. Oh well, he thought at the time, it was supposed to have been easy enough. This was Minneapolis, after all, and while they had proceeded with caution, no one had expected a repeat of something like the San Francisco debacle, or certainly not what had actually happened. Now, riding a taxi out of downtown, he smashed a fist against the soft seat. This should never have happened. He should have posted himself by the door when they had first entered the room. He should have immediately suspected that the smoke could be a ruse and acted more defensively. Instead, the relative tranquility of Minneapolis had lulled him into a false sense of security, and a group of kooks had abducted his ward, and from experience he knew the next few hours would be the most difficult and tense. "So you ain't in any trouble, are you?" asked the driver, a tall guy with a stubbly beard and thick black glasses as he drove south on Highway 35 West. "What?" asked Lyle, glancing toward the front seat. "I mean, I picked up some people at City Hall, and they just got let out of jail." Disgusted, Lyle shook his head and glanced out the window. The last thing he wanted to do right now was make small talk. There was no telling which way this would go, but if the kidnappers meant to harm Clariton, they could have simply and easily assassinated him right on the spot. They'd had their chance then and there at the restaurant, so they most certainly had other plans. But what? A ransom demand? A political statement? Probably the later, but there was scant time. With each passing moment, the tension would twist tighter and tighter, making the situation worse and worse, and Clariton's chance for a safe release slimmer and slimmer. Already the Minneapolis police force was all over this one, and one of the detectives had mentioned that the FBI Special Hostage Rescue Team was swooping down from Quantico. A United States congressman kidnapped, one of the most talked about men in Washington, someone who was sure to be a presidential hopeful, abducted by a few drippy thugs. It was an act of terrorism that wouldn't be tolerated. Less than 10 minutes later, the cab driver was starting off the highway and heading east toward Powderhorn Park. Lyle's neighborhood, he didn't live that far from the park itself, just a few blocks southeast, and when the taxi pulled up to a small stucco house, Lyle pulled out a 10 and a 5, threw it at the driver, and hopped out. "Hey, thanks," said the cabbie, scratching his beard. Lyle's vehicle, a Ford pickup, was parked right on the street, just where it had been this morning, when the limo had picked him up before getting Clariton. He darted around the vehicle up the front walk and entered his screened porch. Unlocking the front door, he charged inside and up the narrow dark oak staircase. Ripping off his tie as he climbed, he ducked into the larger of the two bedrooms, threw his nearly dry jacket onto the brass bed, took off his shoulder holster, and examined his gun. A sinewy, terribly black creature came slithering into the room. A cat, yellow eyes, short jet black fur, a little love machine. She trotted over to Lyle, rubbed up against his ankle, purred. "Hey, Koshka," said Lyle, bending over and patting her. "Yes, you're my little girlfriend, aren't you?" 2 years ago, he'd found her and her sister abandoned beneath an elm in Powderhorn Park, a pair of sickly kitties, not more than a few weeks old. Lyle had scooped them both up, able to fit them in the crook of one of his large arms, taken them right to a vet, and then in the ensuing weeks learned a great deal about motherhood as he nursed them to health. A doting father Lyle had raised them both, eventually giving one of the feline creatures to his cousin and keeping Koshka, the seductress of the two, for himself. Now, sweeping down with his hand, Lyle whisked up Koshka, gave her a quick kiss, and gently tossed her on the bed. He then returned to the more mundane matters at hand, and he quickly changed, tossing aside his coat and tie and reaching for jeans and a loose plaid shirt. He next strapped the shoulder holster back on and slipped his gun in place. A sweater, which would be far too constricting, was out of the question. He'd been very direct and precise in what he'd told the police, recounting just what had happened, exactly what he'd seen, with an eye trained for this type of situation. He'd recounted details he was sure the others, Carol and those two guys from the television station, had missed. Not simply the clothes, the hair, or even the shoes, but the scar on the skinny guy's jaw, the woman's mangled fingernails, where the bald guy had nicked his head with a razor. Lyle had told the cops everything with one exception, and that he couldn't reveal. If he did, a million cops would be barreling down the same trail. It'd be like leading an entire platoon down a tiny footpath. Right, he thought, as he charged downstairs where he called the office and checked in with his boss. He had one strong sense of where the trail to Johnny Clarenton might begin, and by God was going to follow it. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.